Story number 1, The Hollow That Swallowed Sound. Marcus Webb had been driving logging trucks through the Appalachian backroads for 17 years, and he thought he'd seen every forgotten holler and overgrown trail between Tennessee and West Virginia. On October 14, 2019, he proved himself wrong in the worst possible way. He was hauling white oak down Route 219 when his dispatcher radioed about a shortcut through Caudle Hollow that would save him 40 minutes. The detour would take him through some rough terrain, but Marcus had four-wheel drive and decades of experience navigating mountain roads that barely deserved the name. The turnoff appeared exactly where dispatch said it would, marked by a weathered wooden sign so faded he couldn't read it. The road immediately narrowed, hemmed in by dense forest that blocked out the afternoon sun. Marcus downshifted, his engine rumbling as the truck climbed steadily into the mountains. 20 minutes in, he noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even wind rustling through the leaves. He'd driven through quiet stretches before, but this was different. This was absence. He turned down his radio and the silence pressed against his eardrums like physical weight. Then his engine died. Just cut out completely, along with every electrical system in the cab. No dashboard lights, no radio static, nothing. The truck coasted to a stop in the middle of the narrow road, surrounded by walls of ancient trees. Marcus tried the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. He grabbed his cell phone, but the screen stayed black despite being fully charged that morning. His watch had stopped at 3:47 p.m. He climbed out of the cab, and that's when he realized something was fundamentally wrong. His boots hit the dirt road without making a sound. He stamped his foot deliberately, nothing. He shouted, and his voice died in his throat, producing no sound whatsoever. Panic rising, Marcus walked to the back of his truck and grabbed a tire iron from the toolbox. He struck it against the metal frame. The impact vibrated through his hand but produced absolutely no noise. The silence wasn't just profound, it was total, oppressive, suffocating. Movement caught his eye. Through the trees to his left, he saw figures walking. At least a dozen people, men and women in clothing from different eras. A woman in a long pioneer dress, a man in 1950s work clothes, a teenage girl in bell-bottoms. They moved through the forest in single file, their mouths open as if screaming, but making no sound at all. Marcus backed against his truck, heart hammering silently in his chest. The figures weren't walking on any path. They moved through the undergrowth without disturbing a single leaf or branch, their feet passing through fallen logs as if they weren't there. One of the figures turned and looked directly at him. It was an old man with a long beard, wearing overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were hollow sockets, completely empty, and his mouth stretched impossibly wide in a silent scream. The old man raised one arm and pointed directly at Marcus, and that's when all the figures stopped and turned to face him. They began moving toward him, still making no sound, still disturbing nothing in the forest. Marcus ran. He sprinted down the road, away from his truck, away from the silent procession of impossible figures. His legs pumped, his lungs burned, but he heard nothing. Not his footfalls, not his breathing, not his racing heartbeat. The road curved sharply, and suddenly Marcus was somewhere else entirely. Not the same road. The trees were different, younger. The pavement under his feet was older, more cracked. He spun around, disoriented, and saw his truck maybe 50 yards behind him, but it looked wrong. Rusted, covered in vines and moss, like it had been sitting there for decades. A sound broke through the silence, a single thin note, like a distant siren growing slowly louder. Marcus clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside his skull. The note rose in pitch and volume until it felt like his head would split apart. Then, all at once, everything snapped back. The forest erupted with noise, birds shrieking, wind howling, his own voice screaming. His truck sat on the road ahead, clean and functional, exactly as he'd left it. His watch read 3:51 p.m. 4 minutes had passed. Marcus ran to his truck. This time, the engine turned over immediately. He threw it into gear and drove, pushing the truck as fast as he dared on the narrow mountain road. He didn't look in his mirrors. Didn't stop until he reached the main highway 30 minutes later. When he reported the incident to his dispatcher, she had no record of ever sending him through Caudle Hollow. She'd never heard of the place. Marcus checked maps, both digital and paper. No Caudle Hollow appeared on any of them. The turnoff he'd taken wasn't there anymore when he drove back looking for it 2 days later. But the worst part came 3 weeks afterward. Marcus was hauling a load through a completely different part of the Appalachians near the North Carolina border when his radio crackled with a voice he didn't recognize. Through the static, crystal clear, he heard an old man whisper, "You took our sound. Now we know your voice." His radio hasn't worked properly since. Sometimes, late at night when he's driving empty mountain roads, it picks up things it shouldn't. Voices from decades past, conversations that never happened. And occasionally, just occasionally, that same old man always whispering the same thing. "We're still looking for you, Marcus. We can hear you now." Marcus doesn't take shortcuts anymore. He sticks to the main highways, even if it adds hours to his routes, because he knows that somewhere in those mountains there's a hollow where sound goes to die, and the silent dead are waiting for him to return. Story number 2. The Woman in the Fog. Sarah Pritchard had driven the Appalachian stretches of Interstate 77 for 5 years as a long-haul trucker, and she'd learned to respect the mountain fog. It could roll in without warning, thick as cotton and twice as disorienting, reducing visibility to almost nothing in seconds. But the fog that came on the night of March 3rd, 2021 was something entirely different. She was northbound, hauling electronics from Charlotte to Cleveland when the fog bank appeared around 2:30 a.m. near the Virginia border. One moment the road was clear under her headlights. The next, she was driving through a wall of white so dense her high beams couldn't penetrate more than 10 feet ahead. Sarah slowed to 40 miles per hour, then 30, following the white line at the road's edge more than anything else. The fog pressed against her windshield with an almost physical presence, and the highway seemed to narrow, the familiar interstate transforming into something more confined, more primitive. That's when she saw the woman standing on the shoulder, just standing there in the fog, wearing a white nightgown that hung past her knees, her long dark hair loose around her shoulders. Sarah's headlights swept over her, and the woman didn't move, didn't even turn her head. She just stood there facing the forest, perfectly still. Sarah's first instinct was to stop. Someone in a nightgown on the side of the interstate at 2:30 a.m. clearly needed help, but something kept her foot on the accelerator. Something about the woman's absolute stillness. The unnatural way she stood with her arms at her sides, fingers spread wide, head tilted slightly back. Sarah watched in her driver's side mirror as the woman receded into the fog. Just before she vanished completely, her head turned. Not her body, just her head, rotating smoothly to watch Sarah's truck pass. The movement was too fluid, too complete, as if her neck had no bones to limit its rotation. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel, probably just her imagination, a trick of the fog and motion. She'd seen plenty of strange things driving at night. Her mind was playing tricks on her. But then, half a mile up the road, the woman was there again. Same position, same shoulder, same white nightgown, standing in exactly the same pose, facing the forest with that unnatural stillness. Sarah's heart rate picked up. There was no way someone could have gotten ahead of her truck. She hadn't passed anyone. The fog was too thick to see any other vehicles. She checked her speedometer, 35 miles per hour. The woman would have needed to sprint through the fog along the roadside, through the trees and rough terrain to get ahead of her. Impossible. This time, Sarah didn't watch in her mirror. She kept her eyes forward, following that white line, trying to ignore the ice forming in her stomach. The fog seemed to thicken further, and her headlights barely penetrated it now. The world outside her cab had shrunk to a bubble of gray-white nothing. Mile marker 44, then 45, then 46, and at each marker there she was. The woman in the nightgown, always on the left shoulder, always in the same pose, always turning her head in that impossible boneless way as Sarah passed. Sarah grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is North Wind. Anybody got ears out here?" Static answered her. She tried again. "Anyone on I-77 northbound near mile marker 47, come back?" The static resolved into a voice. A woman's voice, soft and close, as if the speaker were sitting right beside her in the cab. "Why won't you stop?" Sarah dropped the handset. She hadn't released the talk button. No one could have responded that quickly in that overlapping moment. She stared at the radio, then grabbed it again, made sure she wasn't transmitting. The voice came again from the CB speaker, patient and persistent. "I just need a ride. Why won't you stop and let me in?" The woman appeared directly in front of Sarah's truck, standing in the middle of the northbound lane. Sarah slammed on the brakes, and 18 tons of truck and cargo shuddered to a stop maybe 15 feet from the figure in white. The woman stood facing away, perfectly still. That same nightgown hanging limp in air, so thick with fog it seemed almost liquid. Then slowly the woman's head began to turn. Not her shoulders, not her body, just her head, rotating backward while her body remained facing away. It kept turning past 90 degrees, past the point where a human neck would snap. It kept rotating until the face, if it could be called that, looked directly at Sarah through the windshield. There were no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over the shape of a face, blank and featureless as an egg. But Sarah could feel it looking at her, could feel the weight of that eyeless gaze pressing against the glass. The woman's body began to turn, then matching her backward head, rotating to face the truck directly. She took a step forward, then another. Her bare feet made no sound on the pavement. She walked with a gliding motion, as if her legs didn't quite bend properly. Each step too smooth, too measured. Sarah threw the truck into reverse, but nothing happened. The engine was running, she could hear it, but the truck wouldn't move. The clutch pedal went to the floor with no resistance. The gear shift felt loose, disconnected. Every control in the cab had stopped working. The woman reached the front bumper and placed both hands on the hood. Her fingers were too long, with too many joints, bending in ways human fingers shouldn't bend. She pulled herself up onto the hood, then onto the top of the cab, moving with that same unsettling grace. Sarah heard her footsteps, finally a sound, on the metal roof above her head. Slow, deliberate steps back and forth, pacing the length of the cab. Then the scratching started. Fingernails, or something like fingernails, dragging across the metal roof. Long, screeching sounds that set Sarah's teeth on edge. Patterns emerged in the scratching. Deliberate marks. The woman was writing something on her roof. Sarah sat frozen in her seat, hands locked on the wheel, every muscle rigid. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. The footsteps moved to the front of the cab, and the woman's blank face appeared upside down in front of the windshield, pressed against the glass from above. That smooth, featureless skin mere inches from Sarah's own face. The CB radio crackled to life again. That same soft voice. "You should have stopped." The face withdrew. The fog suddenly lifted, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Sarah was alone on a perfectly clear stretch of interstate, under a sky full of stars. No woman, no fog, just empty highway stretching north and south. But on the roof of her cab, scratched deep into the metal, were words. Sarah had to climb up to read them using her phone's flashlight to make out the marks. Next time you'll stop. They always stop eventually. Sarah filed a police report at the next town. The officers looked at the scratches and suggested vandalism, maybe from when she'd been parked. She didn't argue. What could she say? She still drives I-77, still hauls loads through Virginia. But she doesn't drive it at night anymore, and when fog rolls in during daylight hours, she pulls over and waits, no matter how long it takes, because 3 months after that night she passed a truck on the shoulder during clear weather, flashers on. The driver was slumped over the wheel. When the police investigated, they found him dead. Heart attack, they said. But Sarah had glimpsed his face as she passed, and she recognized that expression. Pure terror, frozen in place. And on the roof of his cab, scratched deep into the metal, were those same words. Story number 3, The Mind That Breathed. Daniel Kovac had been contracted to survey abandoned mining sites throughout Appalachia, documenting their locations and assessing potential environmental hazards. It was solitary work that suited him fine. Just him, his equipment, and miles of mountain wilderness. On August 22, 2018, he drove his Jeep up a deteriorating logging road in eastern Kentucky to investigate an old coal mine that didn't appear on any modern maps. The mine entrance sat in a hollow between 2 ridges, half hidden by kudzu and 70 years of forest reclamation. The wooden support timbers had mostly rotted away, leaving a dark mouth in the hillside about 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. Daniel parked 50 yards away and spent an hour taking exterior photos and measurements before approaching the entrance. Standard protocol said he shouldn't enter without a partner, but Daniel had done this dozens of times. He had proper equipment, training, and experience. He'd be inside for 30 minutes, map the main shaft, take air quality readings, and leave. Simple. The first thing he noticed was the air. Most abandoned mines either smelled of stagnant water, bat guano, or mineral-rich earth. This one smelled like nothing. The air coming from the entrance was completely odorless and noticeably warmer than the surrounding August afternoon. He made a note in his log and clicked on his headlamp. The main shaft descended at a gentle angle, the walls showing tool marks from when it had been dug in the 1940s. Daniel's boots crunched on the gravelly floor as he moved deeper, measuring dimensions and testing for toxic gases. Everything read normal. The shaft was remarkably clean. No debris, no graffiti, no signs that anyone had been here in decades. About 200 feet in, the shaft opened into a larger chamber where multiple tunnels branched off. Daniel was marking the junction on his map when he heard it. A sound like breathing. Deep, slow inhalations and exhalations coming from somewhere further in the mine. He stood perfectly still, listening. The sound was unmistakable, rhythmic, organic breathing, except it was impossibly deep and impossibly slow. Each breath took maybe 30 seconds. A long inhale followed by an equally long exhale. The air in the chamber moved with it, a gentle breeze that flowed past Daniel with each cycle. His rational mind insisted it was air moving through the mine system, some sort of natural ventilation caused by temperature differentials. But rational explanations didn't stop the primitive part of his brain from screaming that something was breathing in the darkness ahead. Daniel made a decision. He'd mark this junction and come back with proper equipment and a partner. As he turned to leave, his headlamp swept across the tunnel walls, and he noticed something he'd missed before. The tool marks weren't random. They formed patterns. Repeated shapes carved into the stone at regular intervals. He moved closer, examining them with his lamp. Not shapes, symbols, crude but deliberate, carved into every surface of the chamber. And they were all the same symbol, repeated hundreds of times, a circle with lines radiating outward like a child's drawing of the sun. But the lines were wrong, too many of them. and they curved at odd angles. The breathing sound grew louder. Daniel felt the air pressure change, a sudden increase that made his ears pop. The breeze coming from the deeper tunnels turned into wind, gusting past him with enough force to stagger him backward. But it wasn't random wind. It was directed, purposeful, like the mine itself had taken a massive breath and was now exhaling directly at him. And with that exhalation came a smell. Not the mineral earth smell of a normal mine, but something organic and rotten. The stench of meat gone bad, of decay and putrefaction. Daniel gagged, his eyes watering as the wind carried that horrible smell over him in waves. Then he heard the voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, speaking in unison from deep within the mine. They whispered a single word over and over, the syllables drawn out to match that impossibly slow breathing. Leave, leave, leave. Daniel ran. His headlamp bounced wildly as he sprinted back toward the entrance, and in those chaotic moments he saw things moving in the side tunnels. Shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Their proportions wrong, their movements too fluid. They kept pace with him, parallel figures running through adjacent passages, always at the edge of his vision. The breathing sound followed him, growing faster, more agitated. The mine's exhalations became gusts that pushed at his back, as if the tunnel itself was trying to expel him, or chase him. Daniel couldn't tell which, and he didn't slow down to find out. He burst from the mine entrance into blinding afternoon sunlight, stumbled, fell, and rolled several feet down the hillside. When he scrambled back to his feet and looked at the entrance, the mine was breathing visibly. The kudzu vines covering the opening moved in and out with a clear rhythm, and warm air pumped from the shaft in regular cycles. Daniel grabbed his equipment and ran for his jeep. He was loading his gear when he heard a new sound from the mine, a long, mournful note like wind through an enormous pipe organ. It rose and fell in pitch, almost musical, almost like words in a language he didn't understand but could feel the meaning of. The sound was calling to him, inviting him back, promising him things his conscious mind couldn't quite grasp. He got in his jeep and drove. His hands shook so badly he could barely grip the wheel. He didn't stop until he reached his motel room 40 miles away. Daniel filed his report the next day, marked the mine as environmentally hazardous and structurally unsound. Recommended immediate sealing. But when the cleanup crew went to close it 3 weeks later, they couldn't find it. The logging road was there, the hollow between the ridges was there, but the mine entrance had vanished. The hillside showed nothing but undisturbed forest, as if the mine had never existed. Except Daniel still had his photos, his measurements, his documentation. And he still had the recordings from the audio equipment he'd been carrying. When he played them back, beneath the sound of his footsteps and breathing, beneath the wind and the voices, there was something else. A pulse, deep and slow and regular, like a heartbeat the size of a mountain. Daniel doesn't do survey work anymore. He quit 2 months after the incident, took a desk job in Louisville, refuses to drive through the mountains. Because sometimes late at night he still hears that breathing, feels that wind on his skin. And he knows with absolute certainty that somewhere beneath the Appalachian Mountains something impossibly ancient is still sleeping, still breathing, still waiting for someone to dig deep enough to wake it fully. And every abandoned mine in these mountains might be its mouth, taking slow, patient breaths, tasting the air for the right time to open its eyes. Story Themster 4. The Church at the Crossroads. Rebecca Tanner had been driving through Appalachia, documenting folk art and abandoned churches for her photography project when she found the church at the crossroads. It was late afternoon on September 17, 2020, somewhere in the back hills of West Virginia, when her GPS died and left her navigating by paper maps and intuition. The crossroads appeared without warning, 2 dirt roads intersecting in dense forest, neither one marked on her map. And there, perfectly centered at the junction, sat a small white church. Not beside the crossroads, but directly in the middle of them, so that all four roads touched its foundation at perfect right angles. Rebecca pulled over and stared. The church was immaculate despite clearly being old. White clapboard siding showed no rot or weather damage. The black roof shingles lay perfectly flat. A simple wooden cross rose from the peak and the front door stood slightly ajar. No graveyard, no parsonage, no other buildings. Just the church, alone at the crossroads, geometrically impossible in its positioning. She grabbed her camera and approached. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, creating long shadows that somehow didn't reach the church. The building sat in a perfect circle of bright light, as if the shadows avoided it deliberately. The sign beside the door read, "Crossroads Baptist Church, established 1823. All roads lead to God." Rebecca photographed the sign, then the church's exterior from multiple angles. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal. But when she lowered the camera, something felt wrong about the structure, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. The front door's hinges made no sound when she pushed it open. Inside, the church was a single room with wooden pews arranged in neat rows, an altar at the far end, and four doors, one in each wall, aligned perfectly with the four roads outside. Afternoon light streamed through clear windows, illuminating floating dust motes and illuminating a Bible open on the altar. Rebecca walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing despite the space being too small for that kind of acoustic. The pews were hand-carved, beautiful workmanship, not a speck of dust on them. Fresh flowers, mountain laurel and rhododendron sat in vases on the altar, despite this place clearly being abandoned. She reached the altar and looked at the open Bible. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but the text was readable. Except it wasn't any Bible passage she recognized. The words were English, grammatically correct, but the sentences made no sense. And the traveler came to the crossroads, and the crossroads opened, and the traveler saw four paths that were one path, and one path that was four paths, and in walking all roads the traveler went nowhere, and in going nowhere the traveler arrived everywhere, and the center that holds cannot be found, for it is always found, and that which is always found cannot exist. And thus the traveler remains at the crossroads forever, walking, arriving, departing, staying, alive, dead, saved, damned, all and none, forever and never, amen. Rebecca read it 3 times, trying to extract meaning. The words seemed to shift slightly each time, not the letters themselves, but their arrangement, their emphasis. She lifted her camera to photograph the page. Through the viewfinder, the text was different. Instead of that circular, paradoxical passage, the Bible showed a single sentence repeated hundreds of times down both pages. Turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around. She lowered the camera. The original text was there, nonsensical and circular. Raised the camera, turn around, filled her viewfinder, lowered it, the circular passage. Rebecca's hands began to shake. She stepped back from the altar and turned around to leave. That's when she saw them, people sitting in every pew. The church had been empty when she entered. Now it was full. Men, women, and children in clothing from different eras. Sunday best from the 1800s, Depression-era work clothes, 1960s dresses, modern jeans and t-shirts, all sitting perfectly still, hands folded in their laps, staring straight ahead at the altar. At her. None of them blinked, none of them breathed. They didn't move at all, but Rebecca could feel their attention fixed on her with crushing intensity. 100 pairs of eyes locked onto her, waiting, expecting something. She moved toward the center aisle. The congregation's heads turned in perfect unison to track her movement, their bodies remaining statue still. The sound of their necks moving, vertebrae grinding, tendons creaking, was horrifically loud in the silent church. Rebecca broke for the door. She ran down the aisle and the congregation rose as one, not standing up normally but rising straight up like puppets pulled by strings, their feet leaving the floor for a moment before settling back down. They didn't follow her, just stood there in their rows, heads still turned to watch her flee. She hit the door and burst outside into late afternoon sunshine, spun around to look back at the church. Empty. Through the windows she could see clearly inside, empty pews, no people, just afternoon light and floating dust. But she could still feel them watching her from inside that empty building. Could feel their eyes on her skin like physical pressure. Rebecca ran to her car, fumbled with her keys, dropped them, grabbed them, got the door open. As she started the engine, she glanced at the church one more time. The front door was closed now, though she'd left it open. And in every window pressed against the glass from inside were faces. Dozens of them crowding the windows, overlapping each other, all staring at her. Men, women, children, all with the same expression, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror or madness or something worse. Rebecca hit the gas and drove. She didn't care which road, just away from the crossroads. She drove for 30 minutes on increasingly deteriorating roads, taking turns randomly, desperate to put distance between herself and that impossible church. Then the crossroads appeared ahead. The same crossroads, the same white church, geometrically impossible at the junction. Rebecca slammed on her brakes, the car skidding in the dirt. She sat there, engine idling, staring at the church that couldn't be here, that she'd just fled from in the opposite direction. She put the car in reverse and backed up 100 yards, then took a different road at the previous intersection. Drove for 20 minutes. The crossroads appeared again. Same church, same perfect positioning. Rebecca tried 4 more times, taking different routes, different combinations of turns. Every road led back to the crossroads. Every path ended at that white church with its closed door and empty windows. The sun was setting now, the forest growing dark. Rebecca sat in her car at the crossroads trying to think. Her phone had no signal. Her GPS remained dead. She pulled out her paper map and tried to figure out where she was, but the roads she'd been driving didn't appear on any map. They shouldn't exist. Movement at the church. The front door opened. A woman stepped out wearing a simple dress from the early 1900s. She stood on the small porch and gestured to Rebecca, beckoning her inside. Just a simple, welcoming wave like a hostess inviting a guest to dinner. Rebecca started her engine and drove straight forward, directly at the church. If all roads led there, she'd go through it. Her car accelerated 20 miles per hour, 30, 40. The church grew larger in her windshield. The woman on the porch didn't move, just kept waving with that gentle, welcoming gesture. Rebecca closed her eyes and braced for impact. The church had to be physical, had to be real. She'd hit it and either crash through it or die trying, but she wouldn't stop. The impact never came. Rebecca felt a moment of vertigo, like driving over a sudden hill, her stomach lurching. Then her tires were on pavement. She opened her eyes and found herself on a state highway, normal road signs visible in her headlights. A gas station glowed in the distance. Traffic passed her going the opposite direction. She pulled over and checked her GPS. It worked perfectly now, showing her location on State Route 19, 30 miles from where she'd left the main highway hours ago. She was back in the normal world, as if she'd never left. Rebecca drove to the gas station and went inside. The clerk was a teenager scrolling through his phone. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "The church," Rebecca managed. "The church at the crossroads. Where is it?" The kid looked at her blankly. "What church?" Rebecca tried to explain. White building, perfectly centered, 4 roads. The kid shook his head. "Lady, there's no church at any crossroads around here. Nearest one is 10 miles north, and it's definitely not in the middle of any intersection." She went back to her car and checked her camera. Hours of photos from the day, but the images of the church were gone. Not deleted, just gone, replaced by black frames. The memory card showed them as corrupted files, unrecoverable, but she still has the feeling. Even now, years later, whenever Rebecca reaches an intersection, any intersection, she feels it. That moment of vertigo, that sensation of multiple paths collapsing into one, and sometimes in her peripheral vision she sees it. Just for a second, a white building that shouldn't be there, sitting impossible and pristine at the crossing of two roads, its door standing open, something inside waiting patiently for travelers who take the wrong turn. She doesn't do photography projects in Appalachia anymore. Doesn't drive rural roads if she can help it. Because she knows that church is still there, still waiting at a crossroads that exists outside normal geography. And she knows that everyone inside, that congregation of still staring people from different eras, they were all travelers once. All people who took the wrong turn and found a place where all roads lead nowhere, and nowhere is the only destination that matters. The church is always there, at every crossroads and no crossroads at all. And it's always waiting for new congregation members to fill its eternal pews. Story 5. The Singing Caves. Thomas Brennan spent his summers guiding cave tours through the commercial caverns of eastern Tennessee, but his passion was exploring the wild, unmapped systems that honeycombed the mountains. On June 11, 2017, he and his caving partner Jake Summerfield planned to spend 3 days mapping a newly discovered system near the North Carolina border. They never made it past the first day. The cave entrance was a narrow slit in a limestone cliff face, barely wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Once inside, it opened into a vast network of passages and chambers that showed no signs of previous human exploration. Thomas and Jake spent the morning mapping the main corridor, marveling at pristine formations, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone, untouched by human hands. Around 2 p.m., they were in a chamber about 800 feet from the entrance when they heard the singing. It started as a single note, distant and pure, echoing through the cave system. Then other notes joined it, creating harmonies that resonated through the stone itself. Not voices exactly, but something close, musical tones that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling in complex patterns. Thomas and Jake looked at each other. "Wind through passages," Jake said. "Creates tone sometimes, natural acoustics." Thomas nodded, but he'd been in hundreds of caves and never heard anything like this. The singing grew more complex, more structured. It almost sounded like words in a language he didn't know but could somehow feel the meaning of. The song was old, older than human language, and it spoke of depths and darkness and things that lived beneath the mountains long before the mountains themselves existed. "We should document this," Thomas said, pulling out his audio recorder. He pressed record and the singing immediately stopped. Complete silence, so absolute his ears rang. He released the button and the singing resumed, picking up exactly where it had left off. Thomas tried the recorder 3 more times. Each time, the instant he pressed record, the singing stopped. The moment he released the button, it continued. Whatever was creating those sounds didn't want to be recorded. "That's not natural," Jake said quietly. "Wind doesn't stop for recording equipment." They decided to follow the singing. Against protocol, against common sense, they tracked those haunting melodies deeper into the cave system. The passages narrowed, forcing them to crawl in places, then opened into chambers whose ceilings vanished into darkness beyond their headlamps' reach. The singing grew louder, more insistent, pulling them forward. In a chamber maybe 1,000 feet deep, they found the first carving. Smooth spirals cut into a flat section of limestone wall, the stone polished to a mirror finish. No tool marks, no signs of how it had been made. Just perfect, precise spirals that hurt to look at. The pattern seemed to move, to rotate, even though the stone was completely still. Native American, Jake suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Thomas didn't answer. The spirals weren't Native American, weren't anything from any culture he recognized. They were too perfect, too mathematical, and they seemed to pulse in time with the singing. They found more carvings in the next chamber, hundreds of them covering every wall, ceiling, and floor. Spirals within spirals, patterns that connected and separated, geometric shapes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Standing in the center of that chamber, surrounded by impossible carvings, Thomas felt reality bend slightly around him. The singing had changed. Now it came from a single passage leading deeper, and it had taken on urgency. Not quite calling them, but definitely guiding them, leading them somewhere the cave wanted them to go. "We're turning back," Thomas decided. This had gone beyond exploration into something he couldn't categorize. "We mark this location, come back with proper equipment and a larger team." But when they returned to the chamber they'd entered from, the passage was gone. The wall where they'd entered was solid stone carved with more of those spiraling patterns. Thomas ran his hands over the stone, searching for any seam, any indication of an opening. Nothing. Just smooth limestone covered in carvings that seemed to writhe under his touch. "That's impossible," Jake said. "We came through there 10 minutes ago." They tried every wall in the chamber. Every surface was solid stone. No passages, no openings, no way out. Just that single corridor leading deeper toward the source of the singing, which had now taken on a triumphant quality. Not joyful, triumphant, like a hunter that had successfully trapped its prey. Thomas checked his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on any direction. His GPS watch showed errors, unable to acquire signal. Their radios produced nothing but static. They were trapped in a chamber that shouldn't be able to seal itself, surrounded by carvings that shouldn't exist, listening to singing that had no source. "We go deeper," Thomas said, because there was no other option. "Find another way out." They followed the singing through passages that twisted in ways that defied geometry. Corridors that seemed to curve upward but somehow led them deeper. Chambers whose dimensions changed depending on where you stood. The stone itself felt wrong, too smooth, too regular, as if the entire cave system had been carved with purpose rather than formed by natural processes. The singing led them to a vast underground lake. The water was perfectly still, perfectly clear, reflecting their headlamps like black glass. And in the center of the lake, maybe 100 yards out, stood a structure. A building of smooth stone rising from the water, covered in those spiraling carvings, lit from within by a pale blue light that shouldn't exist 1,000 feet underground. The singing came from the structure. It poured out of it in waves, washing over Thomas and Jake with physical force. And now Thomas could understand it. Not words, but concepts transmitted directly into his mind. The structure was old, older than humanity. It had been here when the mountains were young, when things that weren't quite life and weren't quite stone moved through the depths. The singing was a call, an invitation, a summons. The structure wanted them to swim to it, wanted them to enter, wanted them to become part of the song that had been singing in the darkness for eons, waiting patiently for surface dwellers to dig deep enough to hear it. "No," Thomas said aloud. "We're finding another way out." The singing changed again, from invitation to anger. The pale blue light from the structure intensified, flooding the cavern with cold illumination. In that light, Thomas saw movement beneath the water, shapes rising from the depths, emerging from the structure. things that had once been human or had tried to become human, or had been something else entirely and were wearing human form like an ill-fitting costume. They broke the surface of the lake, a dozen figures rising smoothly from the black water. Their skin was pale limestone, their eyes were voids, and when they opened their mouths, the singing poured out, that same complex harmony now accompanied by words in English. Join us. Complete the song. Add your voice to the eternal chorus. We have been singing since before the sun, and we will sing after the stars go cold. Join us. Thomas and Jake ran. They ran blind through passages they hadn't explored, taking turns randomly, desperate to escape the singing figures that followed. The cave fought them. Passages dead-ended that should have continued. Chambers led them in circles. The stone itself seemed to shift and change, herding them like cattle towards some destination they couldn't see. They ran for hours, their headlamps dimming, their bodies exhausted. The singing followed them everywhere, echoing through every passage, coming from every direction. Thomas lost track of Jake somewhere in the darkness. One moment he was right behind him, the next moment he was gone. Thomas called for him, but his voice was swallowed by the singing and no answer came back. Thomas ran alone through impossible passages, pursued by singing that promised him understanding if he would just stop, just rest, just listen to the eternal song. He was crying, exhausted, his mind fragmenting when he saw daylight. A tiny spot of gray natural light in the distance, growing larger as he stumbled toward it. He burst from a cave entrance into rainy afternoon, falling to his knees on wet stone, gulping fresh air. He was on a mountainside he didn't recognize, miles from where they'd entered. His watch said 3 days had passed, though it felt like hours. His recording equipment was gone. His climbing gear was gone. He was covered in limestone dust, and his hands were covered in shallow cuts that formed patterns. Spirals within spirals carved into his own skin. A search team found him 6 hours later, dehydrated and hypothermic, muttering about singing stones and underwater structures. They searched for Jake for 2 weeks, bringing in expert cavers and search and rescue teams. They never found him. They never found the cave entrance Thomas described. They never found any of it. But Thomas still hears the singing. It's faint now, distant, but it's always there at the edge of perception. And sometimes, late at night, he hears Jake's voice join the harmony. Not calling for help, singing. Adding his voice to that eternal chorus that has been singing beneath the mountains since before the world was young. Thomas doesn't go into caves anymore. He moved to Kansas, to the flattest, most cave-free part of the country he could find. But it doesn't matter. The singing follows him. Because once you've heard the song that sings in the deep places of the earth, once you've been invited to join that ageless chorus, you carry it with you forever. And eventually the singing promises, eventually everyone who hears it answers the call. Everyone returns to the depths to add their voice to the song. It's only a matter of time. The mountains are patient. The singing never stops, and the carved spirals that now cover Thomas's hands seem to pulse in time with music only he can hear. Story 6. The Pale Family. Jennifer Chen worked as a social services caseworker in rural Virginia, making home visits to check on families receiving assistance. She'd driven every back road and visited every isolated holler in 3 counties. On October 30th, 2019, her assignment was a family she'd never heard of before. The Ashbys, living on Crow Creek Road, supposedly needing evaluation for continued benefits. Jennifer's GPS led her onto progressively smaller roads until she was driving on gravel barely wide enough for her sedan. Crow Creek Road wasn't on her map, but her GPS insisted it was there. A 12-mile stretch through dense forest that terminated at a single property marker. The Ashby house appeared at the end of the road like something from a different century. A two-story colonial farmhouse, white paint peeling, surrounded by overgrown fields and forest. No other houses in sight, no power lines, no signs of modern amenities. A hand-painted sign on the gate read, Ashby Family, established 1847. Jennifer parked and approached the front door. The porch boards creaked under her feet and the afternoon sun cast long shadows that seemed too dark, too substantial. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again harder and called out, "Social Services, Mrs. Ashby, are you home?" The door opened. A woman stood there, maybe 40 years old, wearing a plain dress that looked handmade, her pale hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her skin was wrong, too pale with an almost translucent quality like she'd never seen sunlight. Her eyes were very light blue, almost colorless, and they didn't quite focus on Jennifer. "Mrs. Ashby, I'm Jennifer Chen from County Social Services. We have an appointment?" The woman's mouth moved, but no sound came out for a moment. Then, as if remembering how to speak, "Yes, come in. The family is waiting." Jennifer followed her inside, immediately hit by the smell. Not unpleasant, but strange. Like old paper and dried flowers and something else she couldn't identify. The interior was lit by oil lamps despite it being mid-afternoon. Heavy curtains blocked the windows. Furniture from the 19th century filled the rooms, well-maintained but clearly ancient. In the sitting room, the family waited. A man, presumably Mr. Ashby, in a black suit that might have been fashionable in 1900. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, sitting perfectly still on a sofa wearing matching outfits that looked handmade from rough cloth. All of them had that same translucent pale skin, those same colorless eyes. "Please, sit," Mr. Ashby said, his voice having that same delayed quality as if he was remembering how to form words. "We appreciate the visit." Jennifer sat in an ornate chair and pulled out her forms. Standard evaluation, family income, living conditions, number of dependents. But as she asked questions, wrongness accumulated like weight in her chest. The family answered in unison sometimes, their voices overlapping perfectly. When she asked their ages, all 3 children said 10 at exactly the same moment, even though they clearly weren't the same age. When she asked about schooling, Mr. Ashby said, "We teach them the old ways, reading, writing, arithmetic, and the other things, the important things." "What other things?" Jennifer asked. The family smiled in unison. Their teeth were too white, too perfect, all exactly the same size. "How to wait," they said together. "How to be patient, how to maintain, how to continue." Jennifer wrote that down, though her hand was shaking. "And your income, Mr. Ashby? The form says you're on disability?" "Am I?" He tilted his head at an odd angle, like a bird. "Yes, disability. I cannot work because of my condition." "What condition is that?" "I'm dead," he said simply. "We're all dead. Have been for a very long time." Jennifer laughed nervously. That's a joke, right?" The family didn't laugh. They just stared at her with those colorless eyes. Mrs. Ashby leaned forward. "Would you like to see the rest of the house? See how we live? It's important for your evaluation." Every instinct screamed at Jennifer to refuse, to leave, to run. But she was a professional, and she dealt with eccentric families before. Rural Appalachia had its share of strange folks with odd senses of humor. "Sure," she said. "A home inspection is part of the standard evaluation." Mrs. Ashby led her through the house. Every room was stuck in the past. No electricity, no modern appliances, no technology of any kind. The kitchen had a wood-burning stove. The bedrooms had chamber pots instead of indoor plumbing. It was like walking through a museum, except everything was functional, lived in. They reached the basement door. Mrs. Ashby opened it, revealing stairs descending into darkness. "The most important room is down here," she said. "This is where we maintain." The smell from the basement was stronger. That paper and flowers smell now mixed with earth and something else, something organic and wrong. Jennifer peered down the stairs and saw a pale light moving in the darkness like fireflies, but slower, more deliberate. "I don't think," Jennifer started to say. Mrs. Ashby's hand shot out and grabbed Jennifer's wrist. The grip was ice cold and impossibly strong, fingers like iron bars. "You must see," Mrs. Ashby insisted, her voice suddenly urgent, almost desperate. "You came to evaluate us. You must see what we are, what we maintain, what we've been maintaining since 1847. Jennifer tried to pull away. Mrs. Ashby's grip didn't loosen. The rest of the family had appeared behind them, blocking the hallway. Mr. Ashby and the 3 children, all wearing those unsettling smiles, all staring with those empty eyes. "Let me go," Jennifer said, trying to sound authoritative. "I'm leaving. I'll file my report remotely." "You can't leave," the oldest girl said. "Not until you understand. No one ever understands, and they send us help, and the help tries to leave, and they can't, because they don't understand." Mrs. Ashby pulled Jennifer toward the basement stairs. Jennifer braced herself, trying to resist, but the woman was impossibly strong despite her thin frame. Jennifer's feet slid on the wooden floor as she was dragged inch by inch toward the darkness below. "We died in 1847, Mr. Ashby explained from behind her, his voice calm, conversational. "Cholera took the whole family in 3 days, but we couldn't leave. The house wouldn't let us, so we stayed. We maintained. We learned how to continue, how to be, how to wait. And every few years, someone new comes, someone living, and we try to show them, try to make them understand." Jennifer was at the edge of the stairs now, staring down into darkness that seemed deeper than any basement should be. The pale lights moved down there, dozens of them, and now she could see they were figures. Translucent, glowing faintly, moving in slow patterns through the dark. Men, women, children, all pale, all dead, all maintaining. "Some of them stay," Mrs. Ashby whispered in Jennifer's ear. "Some of them join us, add their maintenance to ours, help us continue. Would you like to stay? Would you like to maintain with us?" Jennifer snapped. She brought her elbow back hard into Mrs. Ashby's ribs. There was no give, like hitting a wall, but the woman's grip loosened for just a second. Jennifer tore free and ran. She shoved past the children. They felt like cold wax figures, stiff and wrong, and sprinted through the house. The family didn't chase her. They followed at a walking pace, still smiling, calling after her. "You'll come back. They always come back. We're on the records now. More will come. More people to help. More people to show. More people to understand." Jennifer burst through the front door, fell down the porch steps, scrambled to her car. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. The family emerged from the house, standing in a line on the porch, watching her. Not threatening, just observing. Waiting. She got the car started and reversed wildly down the long driveway. In her rearview mirror, she saw the family wave, a slow, synchronized wave like puppets on the same string. Jennifer drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Marcus listened to her story with increasing skepticism. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "The Ashbys on Crow Creek Road?" "Yes, you have to go there. Something's wrong. With them, they're..." "Ma'am, there is no Crow Creek Road in this county, never has been." Jennifer showed him her GPS. The route was still there, saved in her history. The deputy looked at it and frowned. "This shows you driving into the Monongahela National Forest. There's no road there, no private property, just wilderness." They checked county records. No Ashby family, no property on any road called Crow Creek. The case file that had sent Jennifer there didn't exist in the system. Her supervisor had no record of assigning her that visit. But Jennifer had her notes, her handwritten forms half completed. and on her wrist where Mrs. Ashby had grabbed her were marks. Not bruises, prints in her skin like someone had grabbed her with fingers made of ice. The marks were pale, almost translucent, and they didn't fade. Weeks later, they were still there, permanent impressions in her flesh. Jennifer transferred to a different county, refused to work in rural areas anymore. But sometimes, driving home late at night, her GPS will glitch and show a route, a detour that would save her 20 minutes through a road that isn't on any map. Crow Creek Road, it says, and at the end of that phantom route, a little house icon labeled Ashby Residence. She never takes that route. She never follows the GPS when it shows her Crow Creek Road. But it appears more frequently now, maybe once a month, always offering that shortcut, always promising to save her time. And Jennifer knows that eventually, maybe years from now, maybe decades, her car will turn onto that road without her meaning to. A moment of distraction, a wrong turn, a glitch that she follows without thinking. Because the Ashby family is patient. They've been maintaining since 1847, and they can wait. They can wait for all the caseworkers and deputies and surveyors and utility workers who might eventually drive down a road that doesn't exist to a house that's been dead for over a century. The family is always there, always waiting, always ready to show new visitors what they maintain in the basement. Always ready to ask if you'd like to stay, to join them, to add your own maintenance to their eternal vigil. The house needs maintaining. The dead need continuing. And there's always room for one more pale figure in the darkness below, glowing faintly, waiting patiently, maintaining forever in a basement that has no bottom and no end. Story 7. The Fire That Called. Ethan Murdoch worked as a fire lookout in the Appalachian wilderness, stationed in a tower on Rattlesnake Ridge during the dry months of summer. It was solitary work, 12-hour shifts watching the forest for signs of smoke, recording weather data, checking in with the Forestry Service twice daily. On July 23, 2016, Ethan saw a fire that changed everything he understood about the mountains. It appeared at 3:47 a.m., a bright orange glow on the eastern horizon, maybe 10 miles distant. Ethan grabbed his binoculars and his range-finding equipment, calculated the coordinates, and radioed the fire station. "This is Rattlesnake Tower. I've got a fire at bearing 095, approximately 10 miles out, showing significant light, possible structure fire or vehicle." The dispatcher's response came back. "Copy, Rattlesnake. We'll send a crew to investigate. Keep monitoring." Ethan watched the fire through his binoculars. It wasn't spreading, which was unusual for a summer wildfire. It just burned in one spot, a perfect circle of orange flame maybe 30 feet across. And it was moving. Not spreading, moving, sliding through the forest at a walking pace, maintaining its circular shape, traveling in a straight line toward Rattlesnake Ridge, toward his tower. He radioed the update. "Dispatch, the fire is moving, not spreading, moving deliberately, maintaining circular shape, heading this direction." Long pause. "Rattlesnake, confirm you said the fire is moving?" "Affirmative. Moving at approximately 3 miles per hour on a direct course to this location." Another pause. "Rattlesnake, we need you to evacuate the tower. Now!" But Ethan couldn't stop watching. The fire moved through the forest without consuming it. Trees stood untouched as the burning circle passed right through them. It left no burn trail, no smoldering vegetation. The forest behind the fire looked completely normal in his binoculars. The fire reached the base of Rattlesnake Ridge and began climbing. It moved up the slope with that same steady pace, a perfect circle of flames that touched nothing but kept burning. Ethan could see it clearly now without binoculars. Orange fire reaching maybe 10 feet high, rippling and dancing but contained within that precise circle. And inside the fire there were shapes, human figures, or things that resembled human figures moving within the flames. dancing or marching or performing some kind of ritual. Ethan couldn't tell. The shapes were made of fire themselves, brighter than the circle's perimeter, and they moved in coordinated patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. Dispatch. There's something in the fire. Multiple entities. I don't know what they are. The fire is halfway up the ridge. It's going to reach the tower in approximately 15 minutes. Rattlesnake, evacuate immediately. Fire crew is en route, but you need to get out of there. Ethan grabbed his emergency pack and started down the tower's stairs. He'd descended maybe 2 flights when he heard the singing. The same kind of singing he'd heard sometimes in the deep forest, when the wind was right and the mountains were quiet. Not human voices, but something older. Something that came from the earth itself. Except this wasn't faint and distant. This was loud, immediate, coming from the approaching fire. He looked down through the tower's skeletal frame and saw the circle had reached the base of the tower. The flames licked at the metal supports, but the steel didn't heat, didn't glow, didn't show any signs of being exposed to intense fire. The flames just surrounded the tower's base like water around a pier, and the shapes inside the fire looked up at him. Ethan could see them clearly now. They were human-shaped but wrong, too tall, too thin, their limbs too long and jointed in too many places. They were made entirely of fire, burning silhouettes that flickered and danced but maintained coherent forms. And they were looking directly at him with eyes that were somehow darker than the fire around them. One of them spoke. Its mouth moved, and words emerged from the flames, riding on that singing tone. Come down. Join the circle. Dance the old patterns. We have been calling you for weeks. Ethan realized it was true. For the past month, he'd heard that singing in his dreams. Had woken up multiple times to see orange light flickering at the edge of the forest, gone in seconds. Had felt drawn to walk into the woods at night, stopping himself only because protocol forbade leaving the tower during shifts. I'm not coming down, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him. The fire figures tilted their heads in unison. You must. You've been marked. We've been calling you. Everyone we call eventually answers. Everyone joins the circle. Everyone dances. The circle of fire began to rise, not climbing the tower's stairs or ladder, just rising straight up, as if the fire itself could defy gravity. It ascended smoothly, maintaining its perfect circular shape, the figures inside continuing their coordinated movements. They were performing some kind of dance, Ethan realized, something ancient and ritualistic, and the dance required specific patterns, specific numbers of dancers. They needed him to complete the pattern. Ethan ran up the stairs, back to the observation deck at the tower's peak. 90 feet up, nowhere higher to go. The fire followed, rising around the tower's exterior, encasing the entire structure in a cylinder of flame. The heat should have been unbearable, should have cooked him alive in seconds. But Ethan felt nothing, no heat at all. The fire burned cold or burned in a way that didn't affect physical matter or burned in a dimension slightly adjacent to the one he occupied. The fire figures reached the observation deck, stepping up through the flames as if climbing invisible stairs. They gathered around him, a dozen of them forming a circle with a gap where Ethan stood. The missing piece, the final dancer needed to complete their pattern. No, Ethan said. I don't know your dance. I don't want to join you. You already know, the closest figure said. Its voice sounded like his father's voice, which didn't make sense because his father had died when Ethan was 16. You've known since you first came to these mountains. The dance is old. It's in the stone, in the trees, in the water. Everything here knows the dance. You only need to remember. And horrifyingly, Ethan realized he did know. His feet knew the steps. His body knew the movements. Some part of him that wasn't his conscious mind understood exactly how to move, where to step, how to join the circle and complete the pattern. His left foot moved, not because he willed it to, but but because something deeper than will was taking control. His body began to turn, to position itself for the dance. His arms started to rise. Ethan bit down on his tongue, hard enough to draw blood. The pain shocked him back into control. He grabbed the rail of the observation deck and held on with both hands, fighting his own body's desire to join the circle. I am not dancing. He forced the words out through gritted teeth. The fire figures stopped moving. They stood perfectly still, and the silence was worse than the singing. Then slowly they began to laugh. Not mocking laughter, disappointed laughter, sad laughter, the laughter of something ancient being denied what it had waited years to receive. "You'll dance eventually," they said in unison. "Everyone dances, everyone joins the circle. The mountains are patient. We are patient. We've been dancing this pattern for 10,000 years, and we'll dance it for 10,000 more. You'll come back to these mountains. You'll hear our call again. And next time, you won't resist." The fire began to descend. The circle lowered smoothly, the figures still laughing their disappointed laugh, sinking down the tower's length until they reached the ground. Then the fire moved away, heading back down the ridge, moving with that same steady pace. It disappeared into the forest, and the night returned to normal darkness. Ethan collapsed on the observation deck, shaking. The fire crew arrived 40 minutes later, searched the entire ridge, found no signs of fire, no burn marks, no heat damage, nothing. Ethan's tower stood untouched, its metal cool to the touch. He filed his report exactly as it happened. The Forestry Service didn't officially dismiss him, but they suggested he might want to take some time off, get evaluated, make sure the isolation wasn't affecting him. Ethan resigned instead. He couldn't explain what he'd seen in any way that sounded rational. But the fire had been right. Ethan came back to the mountains. He tried to stay away, took a job in Atlanta, lasted 6 months before the singing in his dreams became unbearable. He moved back to Appalachia, though he refused to work as a fire lookout again. He still sees the fire sometimes, distant and small on mountain ridges. A perfect circle of orange flame moving with purpose, searching. And sometimes when he's hiking alone in the deep woods, he hears the singing clearly. Feels his feet start to move in patterns he shouldn't know. Feels his body remembering a dance that predates humanity. The fire is still calling him. The circle is still incomplete. And Ethan knows with absolute certainty that one night he'll wake up and find himself walking into the forest, unable to stop, drawn by singing older than the mountains themselves. He'll find that circle of cold fire, and the figures inside will welcome him, and his body will remember the steps perfectly. The dance requires specific patterns, specific numbers, and the dancers are patient. They've been dancing for 10,000 years, and they'll wait as long as necessary for every marked soul to finally join them and complete the pattern that must be danced beneath the ancient Appalachian stars.